thank you so much for joining us today.
Fix Your Algorithm with Douglas Fresh. How does that, well, that brings back memories for me, Diane, that song. You got to remember this. I was a young man. I was 24 years old. I just moved to New York City, and I had worked on a Nickelodeon show that was a live show that went out from Orlando. And when I'm standing on a set in TV and I look at that camera and know that it's going out to millions of people, there's just something that I knew I needed to do it. So that would always come on, that song, as you're backstage, as you went through the rigmarole of getting everything in place for this show. But once it starts, once that song plays, once Montel just learned about these stories maybe an hour earlier, you have no control other than you can pop in and out and kind of get in their ear during commercial breaks. So the nervousness that the show is going to go well, the excitement of a studio audience. I'm still a little starstruck that I'm seeing Montel Williams every day and getting to say hi to him in the morning, or, that song. Who even picks that song, Diane? Because that, I think a lot of people at home heard that jazzy Montel. That was the show. It was him. It was hip. It was young. It was smart. Man, was Montel smart.
Yes.
Man, was Montel. You can say a million things about Montel Williams, and there's a million different opinions, but what a brilliant mind. And to be part of that, like I said, an hour before that song comes on, an hour before he's about to do an hour-long show of this very intricate thing that you helped mastermind and we put together, and we put all these segments together and whatnot, and for him to be able to do it off of a book, literally a packet that we put together for him that he reads and the producer talks to him through an hour before, is pretty amazing. That song, though, let's comment on the song, Diane. Who picks the song? Who actually says, okay, this is going to be the new Montel Williams song? What's that process when you're doing? You work with, was it Paramount? You said that
yes.
That was little decisions like that, like the song, and how we're going to place this out there into the world. Can you tell me a little of that?
I think the process involves the executive producer and a lot of the executives from the company. Get samples from several, well-known musicians, composers, and then it becomes a collective, decision. And then the graphics also. That's very important also.
The color. And so that's all you. So what we're looking at right now on the screen, they can't see it, but there's like a color scheme to the set.
Right. That's all Paramount. That's all the studio.
Right.
So.
And then you have your bullpens. I want you to tell me how it's set up. When you're executive producing, you have teams, right? So you have how many producers and how many teams do you have under you?
Usually you try to have at least 5 teams so that each team would have one show a week. Montel did 6 shows. He did 3 shows a day, which is unheard of for 2 days. And he had the stamina, he had the intelligence, he had everything going for him. I don't think any other, host could do 3 shows in one day, but he liked to do it that way. And so 6 shows, 2 days. So you need 6 teams, because you really, in order to do it right, you really need a team. Sometimes they were like twice a week, and that was just brutal. And then I had 2 supervising producers. Each would supervise 3 teams.
Okay. So there were only 6 teams. Huh? For some reason, I thought there was like 8 or 9. It seems so, but there's only six teams, huh?
I believe so.
I think you're right. We may have, yeah. I think, wow, that's amazing. I got to go and count to see, but that's really interesting. So the 6 teams, and each one has a niche. I noticed that.
Well, it may have been 7, and then I rotated one out every, 6 weeks.
Yeah, and that was the problem with being a good producer for you and for the team, because you never, and whenever you're on any team, when you never get the rotated out, they want your show. So you have to work more than the ones that maybe aren't the best producers. So the process for that you just talked about 6 shows a week and how much that is a grind for you at your level and what you're dealing with. I know by having the supervising producers, you jump in when there's when we need your expertise, when there's an emergency and we need you to make a call. But there are things your supervising producers can make a call, and then the producers. So I worked under Jen A. We already talked about that, who, like you, I always call it guerrilla producing. People don't realize this was 2004. You don't have the internet like you have it today. You only have a service that LexisNexis that combs every newspaper in the United States. Mm-hmm. From the Wichita Gazette to, the smaller the newspaper, the better. And you're looking at headlines for things that have different aspects to them. So with Jen, it was a mixture of conflict. We had some conflict. Those usually came from carts, what are called carts, or the people that are calling in and wanting to be on the show. But another thing, when you're dealing with news stories and you're dealing with those stories that could end up at the Today Show because it's girlfriend who killed her ex in self-defense, stories that that are going to go towards our audience of women. So there were like domestic violence cases or a lot of survivors of really horrific things. True crime, I think, was just burgeoning then. It became a huge thing with people in general, not just women. True crime was a big thing that we did. I did that more when I became an associate producer under Kim Foreman. Jen was a mixture of that, but she also would come to me. I remember my first show that I booked all by myself. She said, look at this article. And it was about the new infidelity. How now everyone always talked about men, but now women are cheating. And she says, book me those people. Talk to them on the phone, see who's good, find every name in there and then book them. So I did that. And it ended up being Ashley Madison guy that later on was on 4 shows that I was on. And it ended up being this like relationship expert. And then it was a couple. It was this beautiful Black woman and this beautiful white man who were like little did we know, the Ashley Madison spokes couple. But they had met. They were very smart, good looking people who were involved in professions. And they ended up going on Ashley Madison leaving those 2 people. And now they're married and happy with these beautiful kids. And that was really smart of Jen to take an interesting article she read and turn it into a Montel Williams show. That was almost like we had just not invented a new genre, but it wasn't by the time I was at Montel, you knew what worked and what didn't. So a lot of times, a lot of the producers just kind of operated within that box and just gave you a version of that show, out of control teens or drug addict trends or sex trends with teens. And it was always teens. It was always parents worried about their teens. The conflict, another funny story, my first conflict show, I didn't actually tell this. I wish I could talk with Jen about this. We actually keep in touch. We, about a year and a half ago, we talked. It was the last time. It was a girl who was married and ended up divorcing her husband for his father. That's a story that you'd hear and whatever. But when you see the pictures, the girl could have been a model. They lived in some tiny town in Kentucky. And this girl was probably 19 years old, and she could have been a nationwide model. She was that good. The man that she left her young boyfriend for, a husband for, was on God knows what kind of drug. We think it was meth. He was constantly doing this. So I show up that day and I notice how pretty the girl is. And then I see this other guy walk in, going like this. She left for this guy who kept doing these twitches. So I go to Jen and I say, okay, so it starts off as your classic conflict thing. We let the guy just talk and we let him have these twitches. We let him just completely talk to Montel. Come back from commercial break. I'm looking at the signs. You're on crystal meth, aren't you? Then it turns into a drug show. It turns into now we've got this whole other angle of this guy who's is hiding this drug issue, but he lives in this small town in Kentucky. He's able to get it layered. As it's going, Jen's running back and forth and talking to you and go do that and this and this. And I just get so caught up in it. And I loved it. And we ended up like getting the guy. Hell, he was pissed afterwards. And that's where like my job really got bad is you had to deal with that. Well, Jen goes off and starts the after show seafood meal, which we end up having after every show. We'd go and get a thing of oysters, and that's another thing I loved about Jen. She's there while I'm dealing with the meth head, right, that we're trying to line rehab up for. To me, that was like the epitome of like, I work in daytime talk. I just produced the weirdest, thing that was, of course, you heard the story. Would that have been a good episode of the Montel Williams show, Diane? Would that have been you think that made sweeps?
Yeah.
Yeah, that made sweeps.
Absolutely.
So that was kind of fun working with Jen. I remember let's go back to the culture aspect and what I love about working for Diane Rappoport. I remember Wine Fridays. I also remember a retreat we went on that year to the Berkshires. Because you would do a retreat with the whole staff,
Right.
the creative staff, the teams. And you put us in this like ridiculously nice, I don't even know, was that a bed and breakfast? Where were we?
I think so. Peter Villapol was great at finding these,
It was, I was in a room with like a 4-post bed with like, in this beautiful, serene atmosphere. And you were getting us ready for this grind that you knew on top of everyone else that we were about to jump into. And that's always, it's like the calm before the storm. Those first couple months of a season, Diane, come on. How much of a grind is that? When you're stuck in those week after week out and, guests are canceling left and right. So we went to this retreat and you and Montel would lead these little sessions. And I always remember going back to what we were talking about with the OGs and, the craze of how popular 90s shows were. This really hit me very early on with that because you handed us a list of like tons and tons of talk show hosts that had like one season. People from like Marky Mark and Danny Bonaducci and Gabrielle. I remember the 90210 girl had one for a while, and Carney Wilson and Gail King. I'm looking at a list right now. That's why I'm able to. Jim J. Bullock. Who else did we get? Night Court's Marsha Winfield, Vicki Lawrence, Rolanda Watts, Tempest Bledsoe from The Cosby Show. And you handed us this list. Charles Perez, remember that one? And it kind of really, sunk into me that I'm part of something special because you're like, all these shows have come and gone and we've been on for this many years. It kind of made us think, okay, I'm part of something big. Meanwhile, I'm in this really cool place and I'm still starstruck by Montel Williams. And I'm sure you still enjoy wine. One of the culture that you created every Friday when we were working late and you knew it and it was 7:00 and you came around with your bottle of wine. And I don't know, it was just great. And I remember that we're drinking wine and you go to sleep and you even say to Montel, you're like, just everyone go to sleep, have your wine. And the second you went to bed, that's when Montel brings out the weed and his wine. And we just had the best night. We had so much fun and we were up late and we were so hungover the next day and you had these things planned and you were so mad at us and so mad at Montel. Meanwhile, for me, I'm like a 24-year-old kid who's sharing a joint with Montel Williams thinking I made it, Just really cool memories, Diane. The fact that I've never worked on a show that did a retreat like that with their staff who realized the difficulty level of the show that you're on and what you're asking of us for, let's be honest, at the PA level, very low. That's just the way the industry is. And there's no overtime. And you're going to be working 6 days a week. You're going to be on call 24/7 because the segment one guest can call and drop out at any time. And probably 1 out of every 3 times it does. That's a memory I have into the show business world of, it was Diane Rappoport, I guess, in Peter Villapol's and Montel Williams retreat before. I wonder what season number that was. But that was a hard season.
Oh, thanks for taking me down memory lane.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, no, this is your career is so. You're talking about Oprah, and, writing contracts, and me. I'm a PA on this like season 22 of it, and these are my memories. There's a Montel alumni group on Facebook. It's a constant thread of people posting things and the memories they have from that. It was hard at the time. I remember wanting to quit. I remember wanting to just try something else, wishing I took that construction job when it's 11 o'clock at night, or I am getting cursed out by a meth head and 2 a.m. on my cell phone. Like, what am I doing? But at the same time, I was working all the time. So the people I was working with were just my friends. I didn't have friends outside the office.
Mm-hmm.
So my social group coming to a new city, you know, in New York City, with all of these really great people, I can say that. Like, everyone has their tips in the office and whatever, but you know, the culture you created was great. We all did care for you. We were in it together. It was that kind of attitude, and we all knew we were in part of something big.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote that in the like, we just knew it. We knew we didn't. It's almost like they say on that Office episode when they said like, you never know what the good old days were until you're out of the good old days. You know, why don't you know what the good old days are when you're in the good old days? Something along the lines of that. Well, I think we knew that it was because, and now everyone's very nostalgic about the years, but people remember, you know, it was agony. Some of that was really hard. And that comes along with the guerrilla producing. You can produce anything after producing Montel Williams.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're doing the tape pieces on the fly. You're hiring some person to do that. You're booking, you're getting a person to go to Kinko's to send you a picture of themselves. Now you go on Facebook and you get it, but like you're organizing all of that. You're looking through phone books. You're sending pizzas to people so you can get the number of their neighbor because you have their address. I mean, that is like, that's how you get shit done. You're not waiting on something. You don't have this. I think, you know, like you don't have all these things. So like, to me, that like are things that I took away from that show. You ended up at a show. I ended up getting a call from you. I don't remember. I think it was right in between the seasons. And you said, I'm starting a new show. You and I were on the same page when we wanted to help people with the show. Mm-hmm. We wanted to make sure that the people we were bringing on, there was a reason we were bringing them on. It wasn't just for this really salacious headline and stuff like that. And you were really excited about it. And it was in 30 Rockefeller Center. So it was 30 Rock. And it was such a no-brainer. And you're like, I make you an AP. You can bring your own PA. And I was just like, you know, and this was like actually right before my father passed. I don't know if you remember that or not. I remember how excited he was for it because of the hype behind it. I mean, they put a lot of money into that, and you had this beautiful offices, and you know we're operating at a 30 Rock, and it seemed like at that point that was where I hit another tier, and I'm happy my dad saw that before he passed because I think I hit other tiers as I went, but that was like a big one because I had you wanting me. And this kind of legend in the daytime industry, and we're going to do this psychiatry-based show where we're going to help people from a psychiatry angle, which was how they lured us into that show. I appreciate that. Like it really, and that's it. Didn't I don't want to talk about details of a lot of the conflict shows I worked on or shows that kind of I thought were one thing and ended up being another thing that had nothing to do with you, as we know. It just was what people thought rated at the time. I think you and I knew if we stuck to the original game plan, it could have been as big as we wanted it to be. It just turned into what I ended up disliking about daytime television and wanting to get the hell out. You know, I remember there was one episode that you weren't there. There was another executive producer that came in. It was this couple, and these people really, we had a chance there, and I could really book some really good stories and guests because I had the psychiatry thing. All I had to say is, he's a psychiatrist. Dr. Phil's not even a psychiatrist. You're going to be in 30 Rock. And we got these young, beautiful guests that were telling us everything. I remember there was a producer I worked with. Her name's Joelle. She ended up, I think she was an executive producer for Sherry Shepherd now. And she was my producer there as an AP. And some of those, the best things I ever produced were some of those things before it they just wanted fighting and then mixing the celebrities, but like reality show celebrities. And it turned into a mismatch. I ended up leaving there probably a month before the season ended because I got into a big moral ethical thing, Diane. I never wanted to mislead people to come on the show, ever. So it was a couple that were at odds. He wanted her back so bad he'd do anything. But I think he was sticking to, I didn't do anything, but I want you back. But the guy cheated on her. And that's what she couldn't let go of, and blah, 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 blah. He had said to me beforehand, I'm not doing a lie detector test. Not doing a lie detector. I'm like, you won't do a lie detector test. We're just going to get you help. Maybe if you go out there and you tell her everything and blurt it out, I think she's going to appreciate that, buddy. But we won't give you a lie detector test. I just want her back if she knows. I know if she knows that she never take. It was just like this whole thing. In the middle of a segment, they decide that we're going to bring out the lie detector guy. We're going to give this guy a lie detector test on the fly, because that's what the executive producer knew. And this guy throws off the microphone, runs out to Keith is chasing him down the hallway of 30 Rock. It was so embarrassing, because there were like people doing tours of like SNL and the news, and here is like this like really ghetto trashy show running through the hallways, chasing this kid as Keith chases this kid into the elevator.
Wow.
And he wants nothing to do with Keith. Goes down. All right, it's done. We're up. The executive producer, go get him. Done. So I go down and I convince this guy to come up and do a lie detector test, and I was the hero. Doug got him to do it. Keith couldn't even get him to do it. Blah, blah, blah. Hero. I felt so shitty because this guy wouldn't even look me in the eye afterwards. Like this, I had done everything I didn't want to do, going back to, getting people under false pretenses. And I left shortly after that. And each thing was getting slimer and slimier. And we were just losing the integrity of everything. And I knew the show wasn't going to get picked. It's almost like they wanted to like be Tyra Banks' show. Like they wanted the Dr. Keith Abloh show to be the Tyra Banks show. Like what? So I like went to Chicago. Like I was dating a girl out. She actually lived in Wisconsin, and I moved to Chicago. I worked at A&E's biography and log tape for like a month before I finally was like, oh God, I got to go back to daytime TV.
Doug, this is what I respected about you from the moment I met you and you got hired from Montel. I just knew that you had a purpose, in accepting a position, even though you've never done talk shows, but you had integrity. You knew what good television was, and you knew how not to compromise, to get an end result. You can get it a different way. And that's why you were one of my first hires when I, went to Keith Abloh show. One of the very first phone calls I made.
Yeah, that made me feel good because of how much I respect you. And it's like, like I said,
But you made a good point, and that's where I think a lot of things fall. Is when you take a host and you want them to be like somebody else. Like they wanted Maury to be like Sally. Well, that didn't work the first year. They wanted Keith Abloh to be like Tyra Banks. Well, that didn't work. You have to take the host and give them, the strength, and the personality of who they are. And then they will elevate what's on the stage.
Absolutely. And that's where I think the executive producer role comes in so huge, in the respect that I have for, like I said, the cultures you created with Montel, and I'm sure you did with Maury too. And you're knowing the talent, and you're able to still mold and direct that person into what that person needs to be. What happened there, I think there were way too many chefs in that kitchen. And I really believed if, we stuck to the original vision, it could have been. So I appreciate the compliment on that, because that is important to me. I went on to work in court. I worked on a couple more conflict shows. I think a kid that's raised on Disney and always have always let your conscience be your guide has a hard time working in entertainment as a whole. Sometimes it's very different than what people see when you're working behind the scenes, because it's more about the job is what it is. It's more about dealing with the personalities and the egos around you, from the other producers to the executive producers to the host. Those are the problems. Those are the things that end up sinking ships, I think. So that's why it's like, this better than anything. You're managing your talent in a way to get what your vision is. So What was it like when you first meet with Montel? Does he have to approve you, or he already knows Diane Rappoport's my new executive producer? I'm about to go meet her and we're going to talk about the vision for the show. How does that process work?
Oh, no, he had to approve me, and we had a really nice conversation. I guess my background, he appreciated that I wasn't coming from a show that he felt that he wanted to be like. I think knowing that I worked with Oprah was very important to him, that my standards were, such that they were his standards. He wanted, someone that could appreciate his personality, what he wanted to achieve, and that.
What makes Montel like so? What just made him just become what he was and what it turned into? Because he was a motivational speaker. That's how he got his show early on, which says a lot about what he was able to do in terms of giving motivation at the end and giving that kind of resolution.
Right. He was able to elevate whatever material you gave him. He just didn't regurgitate it. He didn't just, you didn't have to give him cue cards to say, this is the question you're going to ask. He knew what to ask.
Yeah.
And he knew what to anticipate, as the next, follow-up question.
Yeah. And therefore you knew what to tee him up with.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it became, at least from a producing angle, from what I see. You know how to tee him up.
So he was just brilliant. He really was. And he could read people extremely well. He could cut through the chase. That's why he was so good with families, with young people. Somehow he wasn't intimidating to young people, the teens. They actually looked up to him.
Yeah. So he could say some pretty truths to them and not get a bad rip. Interesting.
I think the key to his success, it was him, and there was nobody like him.
Yeah, and a trustworthy. Like I saw, I'll play it. Actually, you're not gonna hear it now, but I'll play it. It's from his very last segment.
Well, it's done. 17 years. Crazy. I don't think it's going to really hit me for a few months. The fact that I'm no longer doing this particular job. It took these shows to make me reflect for a second on 17 years and the power of 17 years of television. And I think if there were one thing that I could say to add some meaning to the end of this run would be, from the very first day that I started this program, I wrote a little card on my desk and I said, I will do a show that doesn't belabor what happens, but we try to figure out why things happen and then come up with solutions. In 17 years, we've talked about a lot of problems. Haven't solved them all. We've offered some answers, but we haven't solved them all. We've asked a lot of questions, and we haven't answered them all. We've offered some alternative solutions, but we haven't answered them all. But I know the one thing that we have done that I'm proudest of is that every single episode of the show has respected the living rooms we've been invited into. And I can't say thank you enough to you for making me a part of your family for the last 17 years. I don't know what the next 17 years has in store for me. It will be in keeping with everything I've done for the last 34 years of my life. And that's always trying to make sure that I alone own the definition of who I am. Thank you for allowing me that freedom.
I mean, we were talking about this earlier. I mean, how great of a job they did taking the show over the finish line. But I can remember sitting in my office at Judge Mathis in Chicago, just glued to the TV the last couple of weeks when they were putting together, and all the producers were putting together these really great highlight shows. And that was the very last segment. When he first started, he actually said he had like a piece of paper. I don't want to just talk about the problems. I want to accept that the problems exist and talk about solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And he stuck to that. And that's why it worked. A respect level for him that I don't think I had until I watched that segment recently and really kind of kick in that he accomplished something that no one else did in television, or not a lot of people can ever say. You know, people like Oprah can, you know, like, but he was part of like a legendary time in history, and he stuck to his goals. And he stuck to his core of doing that, of not just showing the circus. And I think that's probably, I'd imagine from what you just said, a lot of your conversations you had with him when you first started working with him, is he saw what Oprah was doing after the conflict and going towards these very kind of emotional, moving things that was her bread and butter that you accomplished when you worked with her early on. And we mirrored that. I remember we had to have Oprah on in the office. Remember, we had the TVs everywhere, which is a cool thing about working in daytime television, by the way. You get a TV in your office. Your bosses encourage you to watch TV all day. What other job can you say does that? But we always were trying to we were striving to be a show that was better than the others. And that's okay. And that's why now I get a better understanding. That's why you were brought on. And that was part of a vision that he had from the very beginning, that, you know, you were able to kind of resurrect after that, because it's such a fascinating part. I'll let you
know, Doug, he, unlike he had empathy. He just put himself in a compassionate relationship with his guests. And so he just wasn't playing host. And that's why he never even really needed experts, to kind of tie everything up in a neat bow. He could do that because he was reacting to what they said, not just opening up your playbook of psychology and, this is, what's happening. He really personalized.
And the audience trusted him because of all those years.
Right.
They trusted him because he built up that trust, and the show's image was able to do that. You let us into your homes and trusted us with that responsibility. Because that's a big deal. No one looks at TV that way.
Right.
But you're letting us in there, help you be aware of something to enhance your brain. To give you awareness, or to give you something, a relatable thing that this audience might be going through. How are they going to get those solutions? Well, they had this horrible incident where this person molested them, and these really horrific things. But like we mentioned earlier, by bringing awareness to it, maybe the kid's going to get out of that situation now, because it exists. We're going to ignore that that's an ugly part of humanity. No, it exists. But what things can we at least talk about that are going to bring solution? Because there's no solution today. The news cycle is so quick that nothing's getting retained. I want to get your thoughts on Dr. Phil. What are your thoughts on his network? I find it very interesting because I was never a fan. I respected him and his and some of the things that they do in really good episodes. If you watch some of those, if you're looking at a very hard to produce and hard things, but to me, it always walked that line of being a little exploitative, because it would go after like the Britney Spearses, and it just seems like it wasn't right to do that. However, I see his big picture with what he's doing with the network, and I have a newfound, I got to be honest with you, like a respect. I think he's looking at what's wrong in the world today with media. And he said, I'm going to have a whole show. I'm going to be able to have a morning show, which the morning show is really interesting. If you ever get a chance, watch the Merit morning shows. There's a lot of very good messages coming out of it when it comes to teaching kids and teaching, and he's able to completely bypass the networks or bypass he puts on what he wants to put on. The world has I'm
glad we were part of that other world, though.
Aren't you?
I am. I feel blessed that
Me too.
Those years of the 80s and the 90s, they just will be with me forever, and look back with great fondness.
Oh, yeah. And it was when people were, I think, striving to be informed and smart, and there was a journalistic integrity in everything we did and everything people did. It was expected. It was expected not to bash, go below the belt on a political opponent. And if a commercial came out, oh, that was under the belt, you would criticize that guy that went under the belt. Now these people just make up whatever they want to say about the other one, and then half the population thinks that what they just said was true. Because we're in a post-truth society. Right. We've been in a post-truth society for 8 years now. We're really seeing the decay. When before we were able to trust people like Montel, we were able to trust people like Howard Cosell, and we were able to trust people like Oprah. When you were there, you were able to accomplish things because the audience trusted what that person said wasn't out to mislead them or not just telling them complete bullshit to, make money. It's just really sad. But hey, what are you gonna do? You gotta roll. If we're all gonna live to 150, Diane, we better do something because it's really getting weird out there. So I'm very nostalgic too, and I'm also happy that I was able to work at places like Montel before the smartphone. I'm a big proponent of society change for the worse in about, I would say 2012, 2011 is when it started devolving. And I think it has everything to do with this smartphone. Yeah. Now we're seeing how it has the chance to put people in spells and hallucinate a whole generation. And that's more topics that we will cover in Fix Your Algorithm, because what we want to do at Fix Your Algorithm, what I want to accomplish with this show, Diane, is to inform and to become aware of things, but not drown in the dreariness and the end of the world, because I think we will get through it. You mentioned the Rodney King stuff. I wish there was an Oprah that would go out on some of these issues that are really dividing people out there and could handle it in a way that will try to bring people together and calm the chaos like you were able to do with her. And I think the people out there are just, they want these ratings, they want this, and the fighting sells, and they're going to keep going and not add to the decay, but not ignore that these issues problems that we're faced with today are unprecedented and they exist.
Right.
Social, I don't know if you saw yesterday, they had the Surgeon General.
Right, exactly. Let's put a warning on for social media.
I've been saying that for years. I said back in 2016, we're going to look back on social media just like seatbelts or alcohol or cigarettes. It is toxic to your health if you don't manage it, or if you're not old enough to manage it. There's no reason why anyone should have to go through puberty in front of the whole world and their friends and deal with emotions and ups and downs that brings anxiety to these kids. It should be an age limit. They should, we saw what happens to them. They shouldn't be allowed to have it until 16. And if parents aren't going to regulate it, just like people aren't going to put a seatbelt on, or people are going to smoke 2 packs a day, or this, it, at least it's bad for you. The fact that people are unaware that what they're reading is completely fabricated or has been completely made to get them to believe one belief that probably leads them to giving money to someone. So it's all a scam, if they're not aware that that's happening, that's the issue. Is that they're not getting that information. Just like someone at home who doesn't know that a controlling boyfriend who hits you every day but tells you he loves you is illegal and wrong, but they're watching the Montel Williams show and you know what I mean? Their mind isn't exposed to information, so they're going to get stuck in that loop. And that's the power of what you were able to accomplish with Oprah and Montel and stuff. That's just, to me, that's just so smart.
And if I can interject something, if you remember Montel, when 9/11 happened, we were the only talk show that covered it.
Really?
For 2 days. Yep. No other talk show. They went on paternity. They went on, makeover shows. Montel was the only host in daytime. that actually brought, the story to the daytime audience, and for 2 days. And did it right? Not really. And he wanted to be true to who he was and why it was important.
That is what separated it. I remember Hurricane Katrina happened when I worked there, and he was down there for a week. That's something different. That's all about informing things. Our first season premiere of the Dr. Keith Abloh show was a 9/11 show. And my couple that I found, where he had PTSD, and Keith diagnosed him with PTSD on there. They were having troubles. He had come back from the war and wasn't the same person. And him and his wife had the little baby, and they were going to break up. And I talked to him in the middle of the night, and he told me how he's having these nightmares and he can't relate to anyone. And he just wants to be back out there with his friends and fighting. And he feels all this guilt. And Keith diagnosed him with PTSD. We ended up putting that in like the 9/11 episode. I bought it on Amazon Prime. It was like $3.99 on 9/11 like 5 years ago, and showed my wife and my father-in-law's NYPD. And I showed them. I'm like, I produced this. And they were like, what do you mean you produced it? I'm like, that couple, I found they needed relationship help. They were having issues. It ended up being much bigger than what she thought. And we helped him treat his PTSD and got him in touch with a psychiatrist. And they're just like, oh, like they had no clue. And a show that I don't even like announce to people that I worked on. I mean, I do only because like I thought it was cool. It was Rockefeller Center, and it was like an exciting part of my life and career. But like the show wasn't good. But wait a minute, that was a really good show. Like I watched it, and we did like like a firehouse and talked to some of the firemen that were there on 9/11, because that's when we debuted, was on 9/11. That was the season premiere, and it was a really well informative, smart, good hour of television that kind of just gets lost in the loop of history, but we should be proud of stuff like that. And you should be proud of like that 9/11 story and working on stuff like that, because I'm not sure that exists anymore. It doesn't exist anymore in daytime. I mean, The View just argues politics. So then you got Kelly Clarkson, Jennifer Hudson. There's more. They just do the celebrity. And then there's a couple of conflicts that kind of rotate in and out. I think Karamo from Queer Eye from the Straight Guy has one now. He's the new Robert Irvine, Bill Cunningham. They always have one guy that just does the conflict, and they try to put him in nice clothes and make it seem like that guy. But I don't think there's a Montel. There's no Oprah. No. But like, why?
It's just, it's flavor with, the audience wants to see now, They just.
But I don't think they even have any audiences, like you said. I think maybe they're pulling a 1. If they get a 0.9, a 1, they're happy these days. I mean, you got to think of it that way too. It's not the same. And a show like Montel probably wouldn't rate.
No.
At all, But it was an important show to have. I'm so happy, Diane, that we got to really like reconnect this way. And I learned a lot about you, and I hope you had a good time going through memory lane. And
I did. It was a wonderful 2 hours that just like went by, It's like
anytime. And just call me and say hi and text anytime, please. Like I live so close. There's no reason why we can't go out and grab dinner. I love you to meet my family.
Come with your family to the beach. I'm sure your daughter would love it.
Oh yeah. We're having a big her last day of school is tomorrow.
Okay.
So we're about to start summer festivities.
All right.
Thanks, Diane. I appreciate it. And thank you all out there for tuning in to Fix Your Algorithm. This interview is actually going to be part of a larger documentary on the history of daytime television. So in the coming weeks and months, we will be having more interviews and putting out clips from that documentary. If you're interested, you can check us out at any place you get your podcasts, or you can find us on our YouTube channel, Fix Your Algorithm. Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate you being here, and we will talk to you soon.
Wish we could turn back time to the good old days when the mama sang